to form the Socialist Party of America. This unity was structural. That is, there were still widespread differences in ideology with right, center, and left factions that seemed completely incompatible by today's standards. Sometimes the center would ally itself with the left, while at other times a center-right alliance would dominate the party leadership. The right wing, in particular, embodied some incredibly backward ideas, which we shall soon see. Prior to the Unity Convention, as I said, Debs ran for president. The ticket received 88,000 votes, which was about 1% of the total votes cast. At the 1901 founding convention of the Socialist Party, a platform was adopted that stated in part, "It's the aim of the organization of the working class and those in sympathy to be a political party with the object of conquering the powers of government and using them for the purpose of transforming the present system of private ownership of the means of production and distribution into collective ownership by the entire people." It stated that the lives of working people are recklessly sacrificed for profit. Wars are fomented between nations, indiscriminate slaughter is encouraged, and the destruction of whole races is sanctioned in order that the capitalists may extend their commercial dominion abroad and enhance their supremacy at home. The party advanced 7 demands, which included things like the collective ownership of the major industries, a reduction in the length of the work week, an increase in wages, and get this, they raised national insurance and health care. Insurance for on-the-job accidents, unemployment, and old age security, which we now know is Social Security. So when the media tells you, well, the Democrats have been discussing this for 50 years, the working class movement has been discussing this for 110 years. And it probably came out of discussions 10 or 20 years even before that. So who's smart? I mean, the working people are the smart ones in all this. They also called for public works programs for the unemployed. They called for universal education for all children and government aid for books, clothing, and food. They called for equal civil rights and political rights for all. The platform warned people against public ownership demands made by capitalist political parties, which always result in perpetuating the capitalist system through compromise. The party called on its members to join the trade unions and to assist in building up and unifying the labor organization. But it warned that the union movement could lessen the exploitation of the working class, but it could never abolish the exploitation. That would take the overthrow of capitalism. Although this convention was a step forward in the development of the socialist movement in the U.S., it still displayed tremendous shortfalls. Immigrants were not encouraged to join, despite the fact that many members at the time of the SP's formation were foreign-born. Socialist agitation among immigrants was to be carried out by independent national socialist organizations which had little contact with the Socialist Party. It wasn't until 1907 that the party's National Committee issued a statement urging socialists to support equal civil and political rights for all residents, regardless of race or place of birth. Nothing was done, however, to implement this resolution. In fact, many sections along the West Coast, particularly, harbored strong anti-Chinese and anti-Asian sentiments. And then, of course, the Southern locals were terrible. There were only 3 black delegates at this convention, the founding convention, out of about 130. 2 of them were coal miners from Indiana, and a third was William Costley of San Francisco. Costley would become the first African American to run for office as a socialist in 1902, and later the first black district organizer of the American Communist Movement in 1921. The Socialist Party resolution on the rights of African Americans merely stated that black people should join the socialist movement as their way to emancipation. This would be the only resolution on the need for true equality that I have found, other than that one in 1907. These resolutions were very vague, though. The 1901 convention, the question of the treatment of workers in Puerto Rico came up in a resolution introduced by Santiago Iglesias, the Puerto Rican delegate. Recall that Puerto Rico was invaded by the U.S. in 1898 and became a colony at that time and still is today. Iglesias' resolution was met with some opposition to the word un-American. It's not what you think. It was used to describe the treatment of Puerto Rican workers by the U.S. government. Apparently, some of the delegates felt that such tyranny had now become thoroughly American, and it was inappropriate to call it un-American. The language was modified and a resolution was passed calling for a, quote, halt to the brutalities and crimes committed by the Theodore Roosevelt administration against the working people of Puerto Rico, end quote. And it called on the AFL to unite with the socialists in Puerto Rico in organizing the working class. To its credit, the National Committee in 1903, which was at the time under the domination of the center-left faction, did block admittance of socialist locals from Louisiana until they dropped their call for racially segregated communities, which they eventually did. The National Committee stated that the question of segregation would be addressed after socialism was achieved. In the meantime, the party would concentrate on economic equality. The analysis of racism by the Socialist Party was by no means unified. The center-left grouping blamed the capitalists for deliberately creating the antagonism between black and white workers. On the other hand, the right supported the racist view of white supremacy, essentially blaming the African Americans for their condition. The center, I found this incredible when I read about this. It's mind-boggling that they called themselves socialists. The center and right factions of the Socialist Party agreed, however, that socialism was about economic improvement and not social equality. The center-right was even in favor of segregation, maintaining that it was the capitalists that forced blacks and whites to live together and work together. Not surprisingly, there were no blacks in the southern locals of the Socialist Party. The center-right declared that this was not discrimination, but reflected the desires of black and white people. The abject indifference of the Socialist Party to violence against black people is evident in a response to the question posed by the International Socialist Bureau, which was part of the Second International, or the Socialist International, of which the SP was affiliated. The Bureau inquired as to the Socialist Party's attitude toward lynching. The National Quorum, which was an executive body of the party, and apparently distinct from the National Committee and dominated by the right wing, maintained that the lynchings were in response to crimes committed by those that were lynched. Apparently, the International Socialist Bureau was content with the answer. So this is, you're now getting the idea that the Socialist Party is this rather broad coalition, and that there are going to be clashes developing in the next 10 to 15 years in the Socialist Party over a number of issues, but this is a reflection of the kind of differences that occurred in the Socialist Party. The position of the left wing was much better. The left wing made no distinction between economic, political, and social equality. Debs opposed all discrimination and toured the South, calling on African Americans to reject the notions of, quote, meekness and humility, end quote. Debs felt that social equality would only be achieved by the struggle of the labor and socialist movement. The left urged Southern socialists to combat race prejudice and discrimination and organize amongst African Americans. Some of the members of the left became bitter at the party's chauvinism, but the left made almost no effort to use the Socialist Party in the struggle for black rights. These socialists who felt the urgency of the struggle for equality and work among the oppressed would turn increasingly to a new organization known as the Industrial Workers of the World, whose members were affectionately known as the Wobblies. And some remnants we've heard about it are in Detroit today, the Wobbly Kitchen. They trace politically their lineage all the way back. In 1904, Debs ran for president on the Socialist Party ticket, and he received over 400,000 votes, or almost 3% of the popular vote. The SP at the time had about 20,000 members, and incredibly, 40 daily, weekly, and monthly newspapers and magazines.